G'day guys. Somebody actually put a comment on my recent live stream and asked me whether I'd actually seen this video from Ikarian, which is a Greek island in the Aegean, which is considered, one of the blue zones, so to speak. And, I basically said no. I thanked him for sharing it. And I said I'll check it later on, and I have actually checked it. Very interesting. The title of it is called Blue Zones Myths. So before I go to that, I do want to actually just show a video which is sort of the Blue Zones LLC, which is the organisation that sort of goes around sort of things. Because this program tends to basically focus on lifestyle stuff, or talks about the diet and ignores certain things about the diet, trying to sort of focus on the plant-based component, ignoring the meat part of the actual diet. But this part actually reveals something about the difference between people living on the coast and people living in the inner land, in the hinterland, like in the mountainous areas. That's where these pastoral type people, they are the actual ones that live longer. Their lifestyle and their food choices are the ones that really, not the coastal places where there's a lot of tourism nowadays and tends to have elements of the past, but also a lot of, introduced elements that we'll never see. They did capture in that regard. So I'll just share that for a sec. Okay. Go full screen. Just so you guys get an idea of the island and the lifestyle.
Here in Icarian, the people have escaped the mechanized.
Just have to redo that because the audio. Need to share the computer audio and also plug myself in. Okay.
Conveniences and fast food restaurants that explain why our children may live shorter lives than we do. It's one of the reasons we believe that they have lived so long. They have managed to preserve their traditional lifestyle. For centuries, Ikarian was a flyover.
We'll just move ahead of that.
To see how well this lifestyle is preserved. There, we met Agaliki, an 11-year-old shepherd's daughter. By all outward appearances, she's an everyday girl who loves dolls, draws fairies, and plays the flute. Her job links her to traditions that date back thousands of years. She's a shepherd in waiting. Every spring, she and her family drive their goats from sea, where they give birth, to summer pastures in the mountains. Their job.
So you can actually see, I've actually done some of this. My auntie had quite a few head of goats, and that's Dad's sister. She's passed away now. But, I spent summer up in the mountains, herding goats. So I know exactly what these people are doing because I've done it myself. And I can't say that I terribly enjoyed it, but I have done it. I have experienced it.
Job is to make sure goats don't stray. Even in daily life, you can see Ikarian tradition shine through. In America, a child might see your grandmother a few times a year during holidays and birthdays. Agaliki sees hers every day. Agaliki's grandmother is 93. It turns out that this living tradition is not only good for grandmother, but also
if you could actually see a lot of the actual things that they plant, because on the islands, you know, you're not going to get any agricultural products. I mean, these are rocky islands. Pretty much what you've got is you've got herbs and spices that you grow. No different than in the mountainous areas. You know, my father grew a whole lot of herbs and spices, and they both have a hormetic effect, but also there's heaps of antioxidants in them and stuff like that. So they do have certain benefits. As I said, I still use herbs and spices. I view them as medicinal, and putting some in there provides a hermetic effect. Some, you know, have a certain benefit. Our ancestors did the same thing for millions of years. The shamans, those for hundreds of thousands of years, Homo sapiens, they went out and got the different herbs and spices to heal and to sustain better health and stuff like that. Through hormesis, we understand it now, that there are active compounds that actually can provide health benefits. But we need to keep this in mind. These people don't know that, but they incorporate that for flavor, for taste, and in some cases they do know that some of these things do have medicinal properties as well.
Daughter. Something called the grandmother effect shows that children who live with or near grandparents have lower rates of death and disease than children who don't. And it works just as well for the grandparents. These grandparents are less likely to be depressed, they have a built-in sense of purpose, and they get daily doses of love. So in so many blue zones around the world, longevity is disappearing largely because modernism's arriving.
Well, I wouldn't say longevity is disappearing because modernism is arriving. That's a bit of a joke, because the reality is, if we look at people, some of the Asians that live the longest are Hong Kong people. They live in a very modern society and they consume far more animal products than many other Asians. That's the real reason. They're eating a more species-appropriate diet, which is quite protective, you know, for them. And so this is a bit, you know, the typical sort of bullshit nonsense. Oh, the lifestyle and all that. No, it's what they eat. And they don't focus on what they eat, or they focus on eat in a minor way, and they focus on, rather than focusing on the key things. Historical cultures for thousands of years. If you look at the Iliad, the Homeric epics of my ancestors, they talk about, you know, great feasts of animals and dairy products. That is the real Greek diet. Most other things were introduced after the Second World War. You know, a lot of the things like the nightshade sort of vegetables came in after the Second World War. Rice, a number of you know, things like corn from the US. You know, so a number of products came in after. But you know, when you look at some of these islands, especially the more traditional village type lifestyles, you don't see these foods. I never saw them, and many other people didn't see them. And that's really important. You know, it's sort of the make-believe world of the charlatan, crackpot academic that basically, especially the plant-based mafia, as I call them, that basically have vested interest in pushing, you know, a certain narrative, and they'll focus on certain elements and they'll ignore the others. So just keep that in mind. Now we'll go to the other video. I'll just minimize that and we'll go to the blue zones. This lady is a nutritionist. Ruddick is her name. She's been over there to find out what exactly do these people actually eat. And this is modern times. We're not even talking about the past, which is really important because, you know, I mean, what people were eating before globalization, before the access to all these other foods is really important as well. Because those people that are, you know, like that lady in her 90s or other people that live over 100, those people basically were people that that basically were eating a completely different diet. They didn't have all these modern, newfangled type foods that are now incorporated in their diet. So maybe that young girl may not live to the same ripe old age as her grandmother if she's exposed to more of those foods through her life in the future. You know, I've seen it happen to a number of Greeks where you've got grandparents still alive and their children have died from some disease, who live in Athens or live in some other city and no longer do practice their traditional diets. So let that be a warning to you. Let's just check this out. And this is the culture of the Mediterranean, as I'll point out shortly, that in different degrees, but doing different places, but it's starting to be lost.
And are able to keep up with their work and all of the things that they had done when they were 50 or 60. Now, these regions have been well studied both formally and casually, but rarely have they brought in a nutritionist on board. Now, I'm a nutritionist and I live in Greece. One of the blue zones is in Greece. It's on an island called Ikaria, and we're going to go there today, and I'm going to introduce you to what it's like to be on that island and what the diet is actually like, because being an American living in Greece, I really saw that the diet that everyone is told to eat, that's heralded as a blue zone diet, is not what the people are eating at all. And so I wanted to bring a nutritionist perspective along the journey. Now, along with that, we're going to have my partner Draco. He's the videographer, but he's also the resident Greek translator. So you're going to see him in the interviews and doing the translating for us.
So basically, she's an American nutritionist that's gone over there, and she's gone to these places and actually seen what really people are eating, what the topography is like as well, how rocky it is. You can't grow anything, like, things that we would normally subscribe, rice, grains and stuff like that. A lot of these things come from other areas to these islands. They're imports. And when you look at these islands, how rocky they are and how cut off they were, remember what that other guy said, how they were cut off for many years? They were just, well, they wouldn't have had access to any grains as a consequence. I mean, nowadays they do, but back then they didn't, for the simple reason that, boats didn't turn up to bring those things. So they were very much dependent on what they could actually get around the island or on the island. Very important. That's what gave the longevity to those people. It's a bit like, if anybody's actually seen my isotope analysis of the ancient Greeks, how the majority of as that study showed, the majority of basically the N15 and carbon sort of analysis actually showed that they were primarily animals and a small bit of coastal fish. No different than the Ikarians have been doing for a very long time, until very recently when they've been, let's say, exposed to the rest of the world.
Hi, we're on the island of Ikaria, the famous blue zone, and we had to come after spending so much time in Greece because I had a feeling that they didn't eat the way that people say that they eat. Traditionally, if you read any of the blue zone books or watch any of the videos, it's all vegetables and beans, and the Greeks don't actually eat like that. They eat a lot of everything. So we came to Ikaria and we were not surprised. Our first restaurant here is a 120-year-old restaurant, and on the menu today they're serving up pork liver, pig head stew, goat and lemon sauce. Now, they also serve bread, and they have a pasta dish, and then of course they've got their salads, specifically their horta, which is the wild greens, and one of my favorites.
This is horta. My mother used to make this. So this is basically a fasting food. So that is what you have at fasting. Modern day Greeks now in America and Australia and all that, they got no idea what they're doing. They're having high glycemic when they're not eating animal products and all that, and the fast so-called silly fasting, what I call modern day wankers, in my community. That's why they're all so sick. And in particular, those who actually worked in, takeaway and restaurants and stuff like that and use seed oils. Most of them are basically down with dementia and Alzheimer's and all sorts of issues. So very unhealthy members of our community down here in Hobart. I'm well aware of, of these sort of backgrounds and stuff like that. But the reality is, even the stuff that she mentioned that they do have, this is a 102-year-old restaurant. As you said, most of the products are animal-based. Now, there are some modern foods, which is basically to accommodate for the tourists and anybody else. But these foods, rice, did not exist until after the Second World War. It may have existed in Athens, but it didn't. It's really the last 50 years. And she does mention that as well, that a lot of these things. So very important what people really ate and what traditionally people ate, not all members of that community.
The meal started with a big block of fried cheese, as is common here in Greece, the saganaki.
Saganaki is fried cheese. We love it. It's a bit like halloumi and stuff like that, but it's a Greek version of it. And I can tell you, I can down quite a lot of that. My grandfather used to love it as well. So on Dad's side, he consumed quite a bit of that. The old geezer. The only thing that got him in the end, in his at 87, was basically pneumonia, because he was too pig-headed to come down in winter from the mountain to a hospital, and then it was too late. And that's what got him in the end. But up until then, he was in great health, and he could still basically walk in the dark down a cliffside or a very steep mountainous side. So, exactly, say no more. Let's move on.
And there's several other varieties as well, but that's what we had, and it was amazing. There's a lot of dairy on this island. Almost everyone we've met and everyone I've heard of has animals on their property for dairy, for meat, and for eggs.
Exactly. Dairy is big in Greece, big time. I mean, I've actually shown in my chats with Bart and all that how, we consume shitloads of milk, more than many Northern European countries. So, let alone when it comes to cheese and cheese sort of varieties. A lot of people sort of focus in, when you actually look at the stats, a lot of people go, oh, people eat, all this feta and all that. And that's the focus. And they go, oh, and they look only at feta and nothing else. Greece has a lot of varieties of, region. We have a lot of, more yellow type mountainous cheeses, and these cheeses can be very hard cheeses as well. So we have a lot of varieties. No, it's not bloody feta, Kefalograviera, Gasteri is just to name a few. We have a lot of different types of cheeses and varieties. So, but unfortunately, if you ask anyone, oh yeah, feta, Greek feta, whoopee. But we have all these things like saganaki and all sorts of other things which are cooked type cheeses, which are really nice. You use in a salad in summer, you use feta, but through the winter, you want to cook. You want something warm in your belly, and saganaki is really nice. Things like that. So yeah, ignore the.
They also tend to grow their own vegetables. So what's really unique here in Ikaria, although...
As you can see, they're all low glycemic vegetables. That's all they are. Corn, they don't grow rice. I mean, there's imported stuff, especially in the major cities, but they don't grow that sort of stuff. It's not part of our tradition. So it's pretty much, the diet you could actually characterize it as a low carbohydrate diet with a lot of animal products and dairy and some vegetables in between. So that's really what it is and has been. That's why you look at Greeks and they're very lean. especially when you look at Greeks on islands or in mainland Greece in smaller towns and cities, very lean. Where Athens and places like that, where there's more, you could say, the sort of English-speaking type world, and their fast food culture has sort of penetrated slightly and changed the lifestyle. In those sort of cities, you will see some people, not a lot, some people that are overweight. But yes, it's a very different story when you go to these sort of areas.
Pretty standard in Greece is that all the food is coming very locally. We had a wonderful dinner here, and I think it's a really good showing that this is not a plant-based diet. It's not an anything-based diet. They've got the carbohydrates, the 3-day fermented bread, they've got the meat that's local, nose to tail, and then of course they've got a lot of fat. Now what's interesting in the Blue Zone book is that they do talk about how the Icarians, 50% of their calories come from fat, 25% of that coming from olive oil, the other 25 of course from animal fat. That's going to be your butter, your cheese, the fat of the animal, these kind of things. But when they do the wheel of food and what percentage of food is represented in the diet, they completely miss the dairy aspect, and dairy is a huge staple here, specifically goat and sheep dairy. So I think as we continue our travels here in Icaria, we're going to continue to find more of this equal balancing of food, very high fat, meat with each meal. We've interviewed several people, and
that's the key thing, meat with each meal. That's a Greek thing. We love meat, See, as I said, I just jettisoned the plants. It wasn't very difficult for me to transition to a carnivore diet because basically I just got rid of the plants, because everything else stayed in the diet. Seafood, meats, and dairy. That, because I love all three. So never live a steak-only diet. How fucking boring, That is just, I top myself rather than actually eat like that. I know a lot of carnivores do, but I find it excessively boring and, uninspiring or uninteresting. So basically the only part of plants that I've left in the actual diet are herbs and spices. That's it, to give flavour to the meat, give flavour to the dairy. I'll basically sometimes cook up some cheese, fry some cheese, and I'll basically, in its own fat, and I'll actually put rosemary. Oh, the taste of the cheese with rosemary on it. Oh, divine. So yes.
everyone has said they eat meat on a daily basis. These are...
Exactly. We eat meat on a daily basis, and we eat it with every single meal, as she pointed out. That is what they really, and all the other vegetables are low glycemic. That's the reality. It's low glycemic. Traditional things, a stews where you'll have basically a bit of carrot, some onions in there, some garlic and stuff like that, and you'll have a shitload of meat in there. And as she pointed out earlier, even the bread, it's fermented for 3 days. You're not going to get that sort of traditional fermentation for 3 days. Even in our region, I remember as a youngster, if it used to be fermented for at least 24 hours in our town. But on many of the islands, some of the traditions are to ferment it, to really break down the anti-nutrients. And they don't consume a lot because it's a sourdough type bread which really becomes stiff and hard the next day. The only thing you can do is sort of like toast it on a grill, toast it and then basically throw, some cheese on it and stuff like that. So it's just another way of actually getting more dairy into the diet as a youngster. And through the day, I never ate bread. It's not, it was something that is becoming more popular now. But back then, when I was a youngster in the 70s and all that, you really didn't do it. It was just sort of like a an add-on. It was something to sort of a bit of bread to wipe clean the actual bowl of food, stuff like that. It was a bit of a filler in that regard. But then again, it was that, it had no seed oil in it. It had no sugar in it. It just was basically fermented traditionally with some salt. So, and it basically it has something like double the protein and, something like a small percentage of the gluten. The traditional Zea bread only has about 10% of the gluten of not the hybridized, but the actual 1950s and, the old breads of America and, those sort of breads. The hybridized has even more gluten compared to Zea bread and even Greek bread. Our main grain areas is basically in Thessalia, which is a very flat area of Greece in the northern part of Greece. And that produces a small amount. It doesn't really cover enough. It never has, even from the past before the Second World War, it produced very little. So, bread was more like you could say nearly, a luxury food from a baker. You got one bread and you literally had that bread for a couple of days. It just hardened and you cut small thin slices, and it was basically just a bit of a filler and stuff like that, a bit of a treat, but it wasn't food, the way it is now where people are eating a loaf of bread a day. It's just fucking madness what people are doing. But primarily it's, it's a diet that's pretty much low glycemic, especially on these islands. It's just basically veg and dairy and meats, nose to tail, as she pointed out. Even showed you some of the foods.
Not tourists. These are people that live here and have lived here generationally their whole life, and their parents and their grandparents, and they eat meat every day. Now, what has changed here is the introduction of the nightshades, the solanines, the potato, the tomato, the eggplant, the bell pepper. Although when we think of a Greek salad, we think of tomatoes and cucumber.
And she's right. These are all introduced after the Second World War. They didn't exist before. They're all, being brought in, and Greeks have sort of incorporated them into their diet to some extent. But what do? They actually peel the skin off where most of the lectins are, and they get rid of all the seeds. And the same thing with the cucumbers. They remove the outer skin. We never have a cucumber with skin. This is a modern thing now that people do in that regard.
And olive oil and feta, these are not traditional Greek foods. They were adapted about 100 years ago, and in some regions much less than that, about 50 years ago.
And what she's saying is right. A lot of these came in to Athens and the big cities about 100 years ago, because we've got one of the biggest merchant marines in the world. So these foods were brought in, but it took them something like 50 plus years to spread throughout the rest of the country. So this is since the 1920s, and it was really up until about the 1960s. These slowly permeated throughout the whole country, a lot of these sort of foods. And they were sort of new modern type foods. Not many Greeks consumed them, at the time. They became more popular over time. And in the last 50 odd years, since the 70s, they've become very popular in especially the bigger cities. Sort of explains also the health problems that are primarily in those bigger cities.
They've really taken over the menu. Now, one of the interesting things that we've seen here in the last week and a half is that the younger generation is unfortunately not as healthy as the elderly. So the elderly are going around still working. In fact, the woman making our food tonight is 93 years old, and she's cooking up an organ meat stew, carrying it down the stairs in perfect health, still working full time.
So this is a lady that has the restaurant. She's cooking up organ meat stew. She's 93. She's lived on nose to tail. She's lived on high quality nutrition, dairy, organ meats. It's the stuff that I saw with my own eyes, witnessed and ate with my own eyes. You know, I've lived that experience in central Greece on the west coast. You know, but in some of these pockets around the country, this tradition still holds, which is really good that it hasn't vanished from everywhere.
But the younger generation is not as healthy. We've talked to quite a few people in their 30s, 20s, and 40s, and they're dealing with the same health issues that we're seeing in the rest of the world. Everything from dyslexia and mental health issues to physical health issues, obesity and digestive issues, food allergies, psoriasis, these kind of things. My theory, my loose theory, is that this is coming from the influx of these nightshades and the lectin-rich vegetables, but time will tell if that's the case. I really...
That's her hypothesis, that it's probably, and there's probably some truth in that, because nightshade vegetables have not really been part of the Greek culture. They're a more recent introduction. Potatoes are very popular. If you go to Athens, like the gyro, which is the pita bread and the gyro that they make, they put potatoes in. You know, it's just, oh, God almighty, you know, sort of, yeah, what can you say? But that's why Athens has more obese people. That's why Athens has more unhealthy people compared to these rural areas, because they're eating this sort of fast food crap. You know, it's sort of the Greek version of the fast food, but you know, it's just, well, it's probably not as bad as some of the fast food industries. They're getting there. Just give them time; they'll get there eventually. You know, the Athenians are great copycats. Let's just go to this other part.
Really don't think, after what I've seen here, that this is going to be a blue zone for much longer, and I definitely don't think this is a blue zone because of a plant-based diet. This diet is anything but plant-based. So the Icarians are known.
So, I mean, I worked in a psistaria, which is a charcoal grill store restaurant. Psistaries are popular in Greece. They're all over the place. I like this. Wine and animal plants, and it's also low glycemic plants cooked in, you know, to provide that additional flavor, herbs and spices, which Greeks are renowned for. But the core foods are the animal foods. And I used to go down to one of the, as a youngster, I was 13 and a half, my first job as a waiter. And I actually used to make, prepare some of the food in the restaurant before we opened. So I used to go earlier there, about 2 hours earlier, to help prepare and all that, and work in the evenings. I really know what Greeks ate, because I actually also was involved in preparing some of the stuff. This is some of the wines. These are called village wines. My father used to make these. They're very traditional style. She'll explain.
Known for enjoying their wine, and often daily, along with their cigarettes and all of these kinds of things. But what isn't known is that in the Mediterranean, and especially on this island, they are drinking a very different kind of wine. Now, I'm not a wine drinker. I actually don't even enjoy the taste of wine usually, but the Icarian wine, it really should be called something else. Yes, it's made from grapes, but it's made in the old world way. It's still stomped, it's still fermented with wild yeast, and it's not pasteurized. It's low sulfate and all of the other good things. So when you drink this, it actually tastes more like some of the Russian fermented drinks that I've had that are non-alcoholic, more than a wine. It doesn't have any of the wine flavor to it. And you'll notice this color is really unique. It's quite thick as well. This wine is unfiltered. So we're really looking at a very probiotic, very low sugar wine. There's no sweetness to this at all.
Exactly. That's real Greek wines. You know, they're not flavored, sugary, or they actually are more like a probiotic. And they're called village wines, you know, choriatico krasi, you know, which is the Greek word for it. And that's what they are, you know. So they've got a good alcohol content in them, and they pretty much, all the sugars are fermented out, and and has a lot of beneficial bacteria and other things in there. So it's very different than what we know. Let's just move ahead a bit.
Many of these folks have lived well into their 90s, and some, like this one, well over 100.
So we've covered the, you know, she's gone to, you know, to look at burial sites. So very interesting. Let's see what's on the menu.
Of the Ikarian diet, and it was fascinating because there wasn't a segment on any of the food questionnaires for the Ikarians on dairy or on chicken, pork, lamb, and goat, and these are some of their mostly consumed foods. They were completely omitted from all the studies I've found.
So did you hear what she said? All the studies that she found, and she's a nutritionist, pork wasn't identified, chicken wasn't identified, lamb, goat, all these sort of foods were not identified. None in these studies. So forget about the, you know, that they are observational epidemiological studies where the information is really dodgy and all that. And they have beef, but this is an island where it can't support beef production. So obviously people would have answered, no, we don't eat beef. And obviously they don't, because they eat a whole lot of other animal products. The other point that I want to make is also that they exclude organ meats, you know. And the other thing is obviously the dairy component as well, which is very big on the islands. I know my younger sister lives on one of, well, came from one of, now she's in WA, but her family that she's married into live on Milos. And these people, you know, produce their own dairy products. Actually, they actually lather them with olive oil and they put them under the actual house to dry out. So anyway, I know there's traditions, you know, salt, olive oil around it to create it. Well, that's their tradition in Milos. On some of the other islands, they just put extra salt. They've got different ways of actually doing it, but they, you know, the different, if smaller islands, Milos is a very big island, so it can actually grow its own olives. So it's a bit different in that regard.
Making it appear as though they just eat red meat once to twice a week, which is true. They don't eat a lot of beef here. This is not a beef-friendly island. The cattle really can't live well on this terrain. This is more for sheep and lamb and goats.
You understand? Sheep, lamb, and goats. I mean, there's, you know, and pigs as well, and chickens. But, you know, this isn't flat pasture, you know, green pastures. Goats will eat anything. There's more goats on these islands than there is some sheep in the lowlands, but primarily it's goats because it's very hilly and mountainous. So that's the sort of stuff that get around. Very much like that in most parts of Greece, except northern Greece, where you do have cattle. That's sort of the exception. And also the island of Evia, which is to the northeast of Athens, that also had cattle, and a bit of cattle also on Crete. But most other parts of Greece are too rocky. I mean, Greece is 80% mountainous. It's pretty much goat and lamb sort of country.
And you can really see it in all the menus. So as I look at this menu here, most of the appetizers are meat-based. You have chicken with sauce, sauteed pork, meatballs with yogurt dip, several different kinds of fried cheeses, tzatziki, which is a wonderful yogurt dish. And then you've got all the main dishes, which are all meat-based and seafood. Everything from fried whole fish to pork belly to a hamburger stuffed with cheese, of all things. And that's actually quite common here. So you can...
I actually do make hamburger stuffed with cheese, and I love it. As I said, I'll put cheese on top, inside meat. I will, I'm a fanatic. Sorry, but that's me. It's a Greek thing. We love dairy and we love meat, and we love cooking both.
Really see, even with the salads, a lot of the salads have meat or definitely dairy in them as well, and those are considered more of a side dish and appetizer.
And that's exactly it. Salads are considered an appetizer and a side dish. That's what they are. If you take a look, there's not much in a salad, Greek salad. It's just a small, with a big plonk of feta cheese, some rosemary or some oregano, and basically a bit of sprinkled olive. It's just another avenue of getting more dairy and more fat into the diet. Simple as that. And it's an appetizer. It's not the main dish, as she points out. Let alone, it also has meat in it. So, most salads that we, in countries like the English-speaking countries in particular, salads are basically, you don't put meat in salads. Well, in Greece you do. You put shitloads of cheese and you put meat. Especially cured meats, you cut them in pieces and throw them in there. So completely different approach. So there's more meat and cheese in our salads, and it's like the vegetable part is like a garnish type thing. The only time people actually will consume slightly more plant food is when they're very poor, or in wartime and stuff like that. I know, because my parents lived through the Second World War. They told me a lot of horrendous stories. That's for another time.
So from this, you can really see it's not a plant-based diet here at all. And I think we got the misperception that it was a plant-based diet because of things lacking on the food questionnaires given to the Ikarians.
Nico, I'm going to ask you a few questions.
So basically, she points out the obvious, that these people in their questionnaires weren't actually given the information to answer appropriately, or to record their foods appropriately, what their diet is. So this is actually a local guy. Obviously, he's not a pastoral guy. He lives in the lowlands, in more touristy type environment and all that. But even here, even this guy basically that is living, in an environment where there's more access to modern day foods in a modern time, doesn't consume one living in Australia or the US.
Questions about what your diet is like every day, and generally for the people around you and your family and so on. What can you tell me generally about the Icarian way of life as well?
Okay.
Let's start with that.
Αρχικά όλοι οι Ικαριώτες έχουν τα δικά τους ζώα ή τους δικούς τους κήπους, παράγουν τα δικά τους λαχανικά, έχουν τα δικά τους ζώα. Το δικό τους κρασί εννοείται. Οι περισσότεροι έχουν τα κατσίκια τους, είναι τα γουρούνια, τα χοιρινά, πολλά πράσινα από το βουνό.
Και τι μπορείς να μας πεις για τρόπο ζωής, δηλαδή μια ημέρα?
Πιστεύω ότι...
Oops. Let me just... Sorry about that. Just wanted to stop that. So what did he point out? He pointed out pork, goats, those sort of, things, foods, some vegetables, and especially the mountain type vegetables, which have, medicinal purposes, or They are used in times of fasting. My mother used to cook them, and sometimes we didn't even get olive oil on it. It was strict. My mother was very religious, so she would basically just put lemon, and all vegetables are cooked in grease. There's no, and pretty much that was my meal, and pretty much that was it. You basically, because even dairy was excluded. Sweets, forget about it. You don't, because like meat, sweets are basically something that it's a pleasure thing. It's a fast. You're not supposed to be enjoying having a pleasure. If you take a look at the modern Greeks that are living outside Greece, that when they do they'll have sweets and all this sort of stuff. And I say, what sort of bloody fast are you guys doing? It's like they need the priest to basically bang them over the head for their blasphemous eating practices. But anyway, a lot of the priests, tend to be young or middle-aged who have been born in Australia and tend to basically, sort of don't really, because they're trying to keep the parish going. And they let these things slide. But traditionally, if you're in some of these villages and and the priest saw you, they'd say, well, you shouldn't be eating these things in this sort of period. Especially people that are older, that they have closer connections with the priest. But anyway, we'll go back to this. It's the religious dimension as well. But it sort of explains some of the other character features.
Μια κλασική μέρα για τον Καριώτη είναι να ξυπνήσει, να πάρει τον καφέ του πρωινό του, ας πούμε, να πάρει τις δουλειές του, τους κήπους του, στα ζώα του.
So you see what he says? Traditional, you get up in the morning, you have a coffee, go to your garden to tend to your gardens, to your animals first, and then you return to take lunch. Greeks break their breakfast or their fast or whatever you want to call it, basically with lunch. That's usually the first meal. Or it can be like an earlier. I mean, my auntie when we used to come back, evenish. So it was a sort of like an earlier lunch. But still, you hadn't been eating for a while in that regard. At most, bit of a coffee. It's stuff that I've actually said before, how I lived back in the 70s. These guys are still living like that.
Θα γυρίσει, θα φάει το μεσημεριανό του, ας πούμε. Θα συνεχίσει την υπόλοιπη μέρα του στο καφενείο.
Yep, they'll go to the coffee shop in the afternoon. A lot of the old people go have some coffee, play cards and stuff like that, socialise.
Θα κάνει τη ζωή του πολύ πιο χαλαρά από ό,τι συνηθίζεται.
Δηλαδή είναι χαλαρή η ζωή, λίγο πιο ήσυχη, ας πούμε.
Είναι λίγο, έχει τους δικούς της ρυθμούς η Ικαρία. Δεν είναι δηλαδή.
Yeah, the pace of life in smaller towns in Greece as well, like on islands, is a slower pace, which is nice.
Είναι τα δύο κύρια που υπάρχουν στο νησί, ας πούμε. Πιστεύω ότι 4 με 5 φορές την εβδομάδα ο Ικαριώτης θα τρώει κρέας, ας πούμε, τις υπόλοιπες λαχανικά ή ψάρι.
So as you said, for the majority of days, they consume basically meats, and for the other 2 days or whatever of the week, it's basically fish and some vegetables. Again, fish is an animal-based product, and the vegetables are usually low glycemic, like the ones we saw.
Πολύ κρασί, κόκκινο κρασί παραγωγής Ικαρίας. Νομίζω αυτό είναι το μυστικό τους.
Εντάξει.
Τρώνε δικά τους προϊόντα, από δικούς τους κήπους.
They eat their own products from their own gardens.
Χωρίς φάρμακα.
Without chemicals, the animals eat well.
Τα ζώα τρέφονται καλά, δεν βασανίζονται.
They don't suffer, they are free-ranging.
Είναι ελεύθερα σε χωράφια, νομίζω ότι αυτό είμαστε blue zone.
Και για τις εποχές αλλάζετε τα φαγητά που τρώτε κατά εποχή?
Τα λαχανικά είναι της εποχής. Το χειμώνα, ας πούμε, δεν συνηθίζεται να τρώνε ντομάτες, ας πούμε.
So it's talking about, the vegetables are in their season. You don't eat that sort of stuff in winter, obviously.
Αυτά είναι καλοκαιρινά φρούτα. Στο χειμώνα έχει πιο πολύ καρότα, κολοκύθια, λάχανα.
Carrots, pumpkins, cabbage. So these are all low glycemic things, and glycemic load. I mean, my father still cooks like that. He'll cook, a big, like the sort of the backbone of the lamb, a leg of lamb, and he'll put it in, and he'll basically put in, and he'll cook that up. And once that's cooked up, then he'll cut in some carrots and some, cabbage, and he'll throw that in, and he'll throw a bit, of pumpkin and zucchini and stuff like that, and let it cook, as well. And that's it. So there's low glycemic vegetables that's what they fed us for a long time until we changed our diet, and for the detriment, as I know myself, moving away from my ancestral diet to a large extent caused my health problems. I should have continued what Dad was doing. I would have been better off for it. I definitely wouldn't have had cardiovascular disease.
Εντάξει, το κρέας είναι όλη την εποχή.
And meat is available all seasons, obviously.
Ξέρουμε.
Και για τυριά και...
Τυρί, επειδή υπάρχουν πολλά κατσίκια στο νησί,
ναι.
Παράγουν δικό τους τυρί, η οποία λέγεται καθούρα, είναι παραδοσιακό τυρί.
So they have a traditional cheese that they produce, καθούρα, and and pretty much he talks about the animal production, but also.
Νομίζω αυτό είναι το κύριο μας τυρί. Επίσης το παραδοσιακό φαγητό της Ικαρίας που είναι το σουφρικό, το οποίο είναι όλα τα λαχανικά του κήπου, ντομάτες, κολοκύθια, μελιτζάνες, πιπεριές, πατάτες, κρεμμύδια, τα οποία όλα αυτά γίνονται μαγειρευτό με κόκκινη σαλτσούλα. Αυτό είναι το παραδοσιακό φαγητό, είναι το σουφρικό.
Και τι ρύζια τρώτε και τέτοια...
Νομίζω ότι δεν είναι κυρίως στη διατροφή ο υδατάνθρακας, δηλαδή...
So it's talking about carbohydrates. I mean, there are some...
Υπάρχει προφανώς στη διατροφή, αλλά δεν έχει πρωταγωνιστικό ρόλο.
But it's not the primary things that they eat. As you said, not what we primarily eat. And they don't. A lot of it in these villages and all that. Basically, the quantity of these products is limited. I remember a Dad's village. I mean, there was, you had to go to one of the bigger villages. Actually, in a store, you could actually buy things like rice and stuff like that. So these were like, you could say, modern day, like that you don't generally have. Majority is still dairy, animal-based, nose to tail, and low glycemic vegetables, pretty much. And now all these nightshades in the last 50 years and stuff like that have come in as well that they consume, unfortunately. But that's the reality,
Το κύριο είναι λαχανικά και κρέας.
The main is vegetables and meat. A lot of meat. A lot of meat. Okay? I know. We Greeks love meat. Believe me.
Πολύ κρέας. Ναι. Επίσης θέλω να πω ότι η διατροφή είναι ένας πολύ σημαντικός λόγος για το πώς ζουν οι Ικαριώτες. Βεβαίως υπάρχουν και τα θέρμα που είναι το ζεστό νερό.
Mm-hmm. So it's talking about these thermal springs that have got like high radon, radiation. They actually go to these springs. I'll just She's at the springs over here, and she's basically swimming in the springs. These ones you can actually see, this is volcanic, and that's why.
I want to thank you all for watching this video and invite you to please follow our channel and like the video down below. Just in conclusion, I want to really highlight that really no diet can claim the Icarians, that they eat a lot of different foods. What they do that's so different and that I think is really impacting their longevity is the food preparation, the lack of food storage, that when they do eat things like tomatoes, they're only eating them for a few weeks in the summer. They're not processing them for year-round consumption, that they're really processing the breads and things like that appropriately. So they're doing the proper 72-hour ferment with gluten products, and that they are eating animal fat and animal meat with every single meal and each day. They are not shying away from dairy, from tallow, from pork. These things are eaten liberally. So I think it's really a combination of eating the fat-soluble vitamins found in those foods, along with the lifestyle aspects of a tight community, having a purpose, still working into your elderly years that has maintained their wonderful health. I can't help to think either if the amount of sunshine isn't helping them either, because my goodness.
Probably the vitamin D does help as well. But the important take-home message here is that these people basically are consuming, large amounts of dairy, and dairy is very high in saturated fat. Dairy is actually higher in saturated fat than a lot of than things like tallow, butters and stuff like that, much higher in saturated fats, in long chain fats. So that's one point. Second point, pork and chicken, earlier when she talked about the menu, is very prominent in their diet as well. Remember, goats, they do consume goats. There's about 4 goats for one person on the island. But at the same time, goats also play a very important role in the production of dairy products. So they don't slaughter as many goats. The primary foods are pork and chicken. Okay? Let me say that again. Pork and chicken. Now, somehow this sounds like another PUFA paradox. Doesn't it? Apparently it does. As I've said, guys, animal PUFAs are not the problem. Never have been. People have been eating this sort of food for a very long time, believe me. We only have to look at the Sardinians. They don't even, the mountainous people don't even cook with olive oil at all. And the Ikarians here, they don't. It's only the lowland people that actually use olive oil. When you look at mountainous people like the pastoralist, why would you buy olive oil when you've got shitloads of dairy fat that you can use for your own cooking? It doesn't make financial sense. And I know from my own experiences. But in the lowlands, yep, there's restaurants, there's tourism, there's stuff like that. Yep, they obviously consume some level of olive oil because, it's cheaper. That's really what it is. It's price. It's cheaper, and animal fats are more expensive. Simple as that. But if you're producing a lot in the mountains, well, then you use it more because it's cheaper than actually transporting olive oil into the mountains. I should know, because when I went to my father's village, which was in the mountainous areas, you didn't really see much olive oil. You did see it in the lowlands, that's true, where my mother came from. But in the highlands, why would you transport all that sort of stuff, So it was it was very much like the Ikarian diet, veggie gardens. Dad's twin brother had a veggie garden that actually did a lot of fishing and also had a lot of different animals that basically produced different products and all that. And everything's nose to tail, So I think I've I've looked. There's actually I will. There is one thing that I did forget, and that's the comments. Very insightful, the actual comments. So this is the actual ladies sort of stuff. I mean, I don't agree everything with it, but you know what? I'm going to subscribe just to basically be supportive of her, because I think she's really made a good video. Now, let's go here. Now, here's one person that basically said, thanks for the perspective. I appreciate that you took the time to learn about the culture before commenting on it. I remember eating all kinds of organ meats on my grandparents' farm when I would visit. So this person actually used to visit his grandfather's farm and used to eat a lot of organ meats. A lot of traditional people did. You know, this basically person who talks about Icarian, best friend is from Ikarian. He told me that the statistics that they have 4 goats per person on the island. You also have to say that about their very slow pace, blah, blah, blah. But another thing that I actually really found was this guy. This guy's from Portugal, and he said, absolutely loved and appreciated your work, and so accurate. I live in New York, but I'm originally from Portugal, where I lived until I was 12 years old. The way of life back then was pretty much like Icarian. We ate fish if you were close to the ocean, raised pigs, which we ate nose to tail, and it was preserved in salt for the winter. That's true. They do that still in some of the mountainous villages. Chicken, cheese was always around, and people walked everywhere. Yep, Greeks have a tradition of walking everywhere. There are big squares, and you just walk from one square to the other with your friends and just chat and talk, and may stop off at a coffee shop to be noticed, or nowadays the young people especially. Not much like that today, obviously. So yes, definitely gets mine. This guy's amazing work. Yep, why not? So she pretty even these people that have made comments have basically provided us with this sort of lifestyle was very much in the Mediterranean. It's not only a Greek thing, but to a large extent, in the modern world, in the modern time, and all that, these sort of places have changed. You have to really go to remote areas, small villages, mountainous villages, small islands that are basically still maintaining that old lifestyle, which is very much a low carbohydrate lifestyle. You know, you will see it amongst the monks. They actually grow their own green vegetables, these old, and they actually cook those when they're fasting. They live very long lives, and they've got their own animals that they actually provide them with dairy and meat, nose to tail as well. So another reason why the monks live, long lives and all that. And the nice thing that I liked about this documentary from Mary, this video, she was so, she went there, she observed she allowed these people to tell her what they actually consumed, didn't go there with biases. She's an American nutritionist, but she was willing to be open-minded to look and see what these people actually ate and consumed, and pointed out as well in her video. I didn't show that part, but anyone can go and watch it. I'll put a link to it. And she actually talked about how, you can't grow any grains here. It's rocky. That's how most of the Aegean is, believe me, and most of Greece. 80% mountainous, and the majority of the country's fucking rocks. We basically grow rocks in Greece. That's why people took to the sea. That's why Greece still has the biggest merchant navy in the world. For a small country, has a massive merchant navy. Why? Because people went to the sea for their incomes, whether it was, and others that lived on the land pretty much would depend on animals, because that was the only thing that could actually eat the sparse grass that existed here and there, shrubs and stuff like that. When you go into the interior, very rocky and all that. Anyway, I do have photos and stuff like that of different parts of Greece. I will show this sort of stuff in future so you can get an idea of the terrain, So when you see the terrain, you realise there's no way you're going to have, anything. So it can be very insightful in that regard. Here are these guys. I love these guys. Grill philosophy. You can see them. Look at, these are the sort of foods. Kukuretsi, which is all the organ meats and all that. I've shown that before. And, they make. And pretty much, look, even here, stews. It's all meats, pork, roast, with some herbs and spices. That's what it is. That's the diet. That's the modern Americanized or Greek fast food. They put chips in there. That's the modern shit. Sausages traditionally made. These are old traditional sort of charcoal fireplaces. These are the sort of things. See here, fish with a whole lot of green vegetables. That's the sort of, so it's all low glycemic stuff, This, unfortunately, the peppers and stuff like that is something that's in the last 50 years, unfortunately, which has displaced some of the traditional stuff, which would have been, things like, in particular, onions. You would put onions in between the actual meat and a lot of herbs and spices. But now, onions are out, and we've got a lot of these bell peppers, unfortunately, that, bell peppers and stuff like that we use, things that were never really part of the. But you can see the sort of foods, souvlaki, that's all, that's traditional pork based, made with pork meat. And those ones are, they put them in, like, they put lemon juice and oregano on them. Oh, God, I used to go quite through a few of those when I used to, even before I got home, I'd literally leave with my bicycle from school, and I'd actually go to a place, get 2 of those, and then eat them on the way home. So these are traditional Greek stews, rabbit, and you can see these are onions, that's the sort of traditional stuff, and you can see all the internal, nose to tail, everything is part of it. It's a very different, it's diet that many people have not really seen and all that, or experienced. But if you ever go to Greece on holidays, try and go a bit beyond the touristy sort of areas, and try and see other things, is what I'm saying, before they're lost, before they die off, unfortunately. Most people are leaving a lot of these places, going to the big smoke, Athens, Thessalonica, the big cities, because that's where the job opportunities are. But that's also where they slowly lose some of their traditions, because those sort of areas have sort of adopted some of the Americanized fast food culture, unfortunately. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that on the blue zones of Ikaria, in particular, this part of Greece. And I do, I have to say that this wouldn't have been possible without Mr. Hunter and also this lady Mary that actually did the actual video, and also the other one that comes from the Blue Zone site that I've used in a fair use way, just to illustrate and put a point across and to provide some insights to some of my supporters and people in the carnivore community to understand that there's a lot of bullshit out there in terms of populations can eat more meat, they will eat more meat. They know it's nutritionally denser and healthier for them. So when we move away from our traditions and all that, we suffer for it. And the other key point is, you look at most of Asia, many parts of the world, pork and chicken are very popular. And there's a lot of people that have consumed both of those foods for a very long time in their life. And many of them are centenarians, like in Okinawa, Ikarian, and many other parts. So, basically, we've got a few people in our community that demonize these foods. But when you look at the actual real world situation, not rat studies that have basically been skewed deliberately to make out these foods are bad, it's like all the recent bullshit studies about eggs, and we've covered that multiple times. The 25 egg on average a day paradox. Yes, but it comes down to more, aren't there? When you see a lot of paradoxes in science, it means your initial hypothesis is BS. That's what it really means. It basically means it failed. So let's just jettison that bullshit. And people like, Salad Boy should basically not be quoting failed hypotheses. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice day. See yous.